Our house was kind of the house that would host everyone. We had Thanksgivings with 30 to 40 people. We would move all the furniture out in the family room. And on New Year's Eve, we had maybe 40 or 50 people. Neighbors came up. Everybody was having fun. And I used all of my mother-in-law's china. We used our house to the maximum. It was the hub for our kids and for our neighbors. My name is Allison Horldorff Polhill. I work for LAUSD. I'm a publicly elected school board member's senior advisor and district director. I lived in the Palisades for 30 years. And my home at 1046 Iliff burned to the ground on January 7th, along with my entire community and every single friend's home, which was unbelievable. We lived in an area called the Alphabets. We bought our house in 1996. I was pregnant with my second child. I had her 2 weeks after we moved in. So the day we moved in, 3 groups of families came running up to help us unpack our boxes. There's like 20, 25 of us that are very close friends, and we all met in kindergarten with our children. We all walked our kids to our local public school, Pali Elementary. You can't avoid seeing people you know everywhere. You go to the grocery store, you go to the drugstore, you walk down your block, you know your neighbors. It's really the sense of community and belonging. The day of the fire, we all banded together on how to get out. We were out within 10 minutes. I was working from home on Tuesday. I saw the smoke at 10:30 a.m., and I knew the minute I saw the smoke, it happened to be the exact same place where the New Year's Eve fire was. I immediately alerted our head of ops that we needed to evacuate Pali Elementary, Marquez, and Revere. Called Pali High. They weren't in session, but they were able to evacuate their faculty. My husband is a high-risk commercial insurance broker. He didn't think the winds were coming in that direction. Virtually everyone I know packed an overnight bag, if that. Most people left with nothing because they could not believe that the entire Palisades would burn. People truly thought that reinforcements were coming in. Every single one of our friends' homes were leveled on January 7th. My understanding is the Alphabets at that moment in time, that there were no firefighters there, period. My son came from Highland Park. He got on our electric bike and he tried to save our house and our whole neighborhood. He has a videotape. He was there when the first ember came up near the reservoir, and there was no one there to defend. So the fire just came in to the Alphabets. We're walking distance adjacent to Caruso's village. Rick Caruso was smart, and he had private firefighters defending, and his entire village was saved. And how could his village be saved if he couldn't defend it? So that is the question, and we need answers. The city needs to explain why there were not more firefighters in the area, why there were not more police officers in the area, what was the cause of the fire, and how are they going to do things differently so this never happens again. We have just been given our permit to rebuild. I think we're one of 70-some people right now who have permits. It's going to look a little bit more modern. We have a watercolor of what it used to look like. We were told we needed to pay an expedite fee and a permit fee, which seemed a bit unfair considering our houses burned to the ground. But we went ahead and paid it because we didn't want to delay it. Every single fire victim has different insurance. We were dropped from State Farm. We're California Fair Plan. Virtually everyone is underinsured, and everyone is worried when you rebuild, there's going to be a bubble and materials are going to increase in price. We have virtually no money for rent. So we are fiscally motivated and community motivated to get right back into our home. It turns out all of our friends, every single one is rebuilding, but everyone's doing it at a different pace. And I do know people who don't have insurance. And I think getting back into the Palisades is not a possibility. I still have a difficult time, and it comes to me in waves. I know a lot of my friends have been depressed and kind of beating themselves up over the fact that they still are feeling bad. I think people are now turning a little bit more to anger because there hasn't been an explanation. But it's day by day. I do try to keep very optimistic about this as best we can. I work with overseeing the rebuild of the schools, Pali High, Pali Elementary, and Marquez. I can tell you we hit the ground running. The Board of Education just passed $604 million to rebuild these schools. I'm very hopeful over the next 5 years, and I have to say, working with all of the young families, they're all in. I mean, they're working on their architectural plans. They want to get back as soon as possible. Because the bottom line is there's nothing like it. There's nothing like that neighborhood where everybody knows everyone. You can walk your kids to school. You can bike your kids to school. You can go to the beach. You can go on a hike. And people want that sense of community again. Just all of those things that bring people together. And I'd like for my house to be the hub again, because I do like people coming and going. It's fun. Yeah.
As LA rebuilds after January's fires, the focus has largely been on individual properties, on homes, not so much on the wider community, the rec centers, markets, the schools, the parks. How to make these devastated towns whole again, while also making them safer, sustainable, and less at risk. From LA Times Studios, this is Rebuilding LA. I'm Kate Cagle. We've already discussed on this podcast some of the inherent challenges we face as we try to rebuild in areas that are at risk of wildfires. Modern building codes will largely ensure that houses and other structures will be more resilient. But what else needs to be done to make sure the next disaster is not as devastating? Los Angeles County Supervisor Lindsey Horvath has some thoughts. Her district runs from Santa Monica to Sylmar and includes Malibu, the Pacific Palisades, and unincorporated neighborhoods like Sunset Mesa. Together, these areas lost nearly 7,000 homes in the Palisades Fire. So, along with the University of California, Los Angeles and a panel of experts, the supervisor put together the Blue Ribbon Commission on Climate Action and Fire Safe Recovery. Here she is announcing it earlier this year.
We are here together to answer a different kind of call for our future here in Los Angeles County, to confront the 21st century reality of climate change that is wreaking havoc on our homes, our community, and our lives.
It's full of suggestions for building in a more sustainable way, not just in the neighborhoods that were recently impacted, but across Los Angeles. But how to pull it off? To answer that, we have Supervisor Horvath in the studio with us. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I really want to dig into this report. I've heard people say that this is one of the few bright spots to come out of the fires in January, is a real comprehensive look at building fire-safe communities. But I think first I want to get you on the record about January and how all of these events unfolded, because people have a lot of questions about that.
Yeah.
So let's start with early January, before January 7th. I know that there had been warnings that were gradually ramping up leading up to January 6th, where the National Weather Service put out this tweet It was in all caps. I have it right here in front of me. It said, "Heads up," with 4 exclamation points.
Yeah.
A life-threatening, destructive, widespread windstorm is expected Tuesday afternoon through Wednesday morning across much of Ventura/LA County. Areas not typically windy will be impacted. So as an elected leader, what kind of notification and briefings did you receive before the fires?
So we had been working to educate the community even prior to that announcement coming out. We had gotten alerts from the National Weather Service, and we knew to follow that because we've been doing emergency preparedness training. I learned when I became a supervisor that FEMA has designated my district in Los Angeles County the most disaster-prone district of any county in the entire country. And so disaster preparedness is a way of life for many of the communities that I represent. And in fact, when I was running, that was one of the things that people really wanted to know I would take seriously.
Because of a fire or because earthquakes and
all of it? The Northridge earthquake, obviously all of the fires that happen, just this year, the entire footprint of the Palisades Fire, but also the Hearst Fire in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, the Kenneth Fire, the Archer Fire, the Sepulveda Fire, the Sunset Fire, the Woodley Fire, were all fires that happened in January of 2025. Just prior to the holidays at the end of 24, we had the Franklin Fire in Malibu and the Broad Fire before that. And of course, everyone sort of referenced Woolsey in our district as the most significant fire in recent memory, and people were and are still recovering from Woolsey. So this is something that didn't just start the Monday before the Tuesday for us. And in fact, the Friday before, I remember sort of our response team that was doing emergency preparedness trainings got together, and we were starting to educate the community from our social media over the weekend. Personally, I had a friend in town visiting from Chicago, and she came with me. I said, I want to go to Topanga on Saturday. I want to go to Malibu on Sunday. We have a red flag warning. I want to make sure that I'm checking in with community members to make sure the information that we're getting out is actually getting to people on the ground. So we did that. She's like, Lindsey, you're kind of intense. And I said, no, you don't understand. Like this is really what people expect. They are concerned because of the experience they've had. They are watching, they are checked in, and they want to make sure we're engaged too. By the time we, got into the office on Monday, obviously it was everything that we were talking about and putting out in terms of communication and response from our office directly. In addition, of course, the county operation was already underway. We had worked with the state to stage various teams from all over the state that came to Southern California to stage throughout Los Angeles County in preparation for this red flag event. We had Los Angeles County Fire that was staged, and one of the things that came out of Woolsey, we have an emergency operations management, a whole division that is focused on this work. And so our officer who leads that was, bringing everyone together. And in fact, we opened our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, in advance of the fire ever breaking out because we wanted to be ready to go.
On that Monday?
We opened it Tuesday morning.
Wow.
And so we had opened and were activated even before the fires broke out. As we know, Fire Chief Maroney had asked everyone to stay over on that shift to make sure that we had all hands on deck from a county perspective. And I think the surprise was, that it broke out in the Palisades as opposed to some of the areas in our district that had seen it before, more in the Malibu and Santa Monica Mountains area. But I think we, on the county side we had lived through that recently. Our leadership on the ground had lived through it and knew how to communicate with each other. And I think that's what gave us the ability to kick into gear very quickly. And I think that it was incredibly, as we were getting into it, since we had just lived through the Franklin fire, I think part of us felt like, is this really going to be it? Or is it sort of going to be like Franklin where we were able to contain it quickly? And there was sort of a hope that maybe it would just sort of be able to be easily contained in that way.
And we've talked about how a lot was stacked against us. You had the dry fuel, the lack of rain, these hurricane force winds, a once-in-a-generation wind event. But it's clear some systems did break down, like the Santa Ynez Reservoir being empty during this fire. What do you see as the failures at the county level and what needs to happen better next time?
Yeah, so that reservoir is a city facility, and I think one of the things that we are now seeing from a county perspective is, while the city operations are in charge of that, nobody wants to hear, well, that's a city thing versus a county thing. Like, we just have to work hand in glove 24/7, 365. We can't really think about what is city, what is county when it comes to that kind of emergency response. And so I think that that's one thing going forward as part of the after action. And we've certainly heard it from community members, being as united as possible. We know that everyone on the ground went into unified command in relatively short order, but even that being said, the idea that there was any time between when the fire broke out and when all of these resources came to fight the fire just leads people to believe that, more could have been done on the front end. And, I don't fight fires professionally, so I have to rely on the expertise of our trained fire officials. And I think Los Angeles County put its best foot forward in fighting these fires. And we know that there will always be things that we learn that we need to do differently. And so one of the things that we're doing, and in fact, I brought forward a motion to make sure we're doing it, is an after-action report. There was one specifically on the alert system because there were concerns about how the alert system did or didn't work. While the county operates it locally, we rely on FEMA and the federal government for how it actually functions. So when it was broken down, I was in an SUV with Senator Schiff, who was speaking with Secretary Mayorkas about the alert system, and I was getting calls from the White House to try and triage that. I mean, nobody thinks about, a simple alert that's coming to your phone needing that kind of level of engagement from the White House to make sure it's getting right. But that was the level of detail that we had to work through.
You don't think about it until people are mistakenly being told to evacuate the wrong areas, which is what happened.
Yes, and people got scared, and understandably so. And so, there are things that are within our control, and there are things that aren't. But it doesn't matter what wasn't within our control, because at the end of the day, people need to come and talk to the county because it's a county alert system that they're responding to. So that's why we have to do after action to explain what went wrong, how it went wrong, and what we're doing differently, not only on the alert system, but on the response in general. I have a community in Sunset Mesa. Many community members feel that, the fire response, they're right next door to the Getty Villa. And they see the Getty Villa was able to survive the fires, and they live right next door. So how did that survive, and how did the homes, nearly 400 of them in their neighborhood, get destroyed? These are questions that they have that they're coming to our office with, and they deserve answers. And so that's why we brought forward a motion to say, we want to answer these questions. We want to learn everything that we can from what happened so we can do better. And that's how you start to rebuild trust with people who feel that even if we did everything that we could, they still feel their systems failed them. And they want to know why. They want to know what happened, and they want to know what we're doing about it.
Well, and the homeowner in the top of this episode talked about waiting for fire crews to show up on her street, the Alphabet Streets right near the Palisades Village, which is still standing. There's been a lot of reporting, and, Rick Caruso has openly said that he had private firefighters stationed there. How do you think about that? Was it just with these hurricane force winds, it was just impossible to have enough firefighters to fight this fire?
So the way it's been explained to me, and I've now gone on CNN and other networks talking about fire science, which is not what I thought I'd be doing in 2025. But, the idea that we have to understand how fire moves in a situation like this, for some of the reasons that you mentioned, the fuel and sort of what the terrain was on the ground, making sure that we know where we need to stage people. I think all of that comes into play in terms of how you respond. People say, well, why didn't we have more people on the ground in advance? We had more than ever before staged in the Los Angeles County area in advance of this red flag effort. And, I've heard from our chief that even if we had every firefighter in the United States of America on the ground, we still wouldn't have been able to take on, tornado-style winds combined with fire. And in fact, when I spoke with a firefighter on the ground, when I was up in the hills with Adam Schiff that day, he was on the ground. He had been out for 72 hours. He had only just recently spoken to his family. And you could tell he was weary, worn, and just tired and frustrated and still going. And he said, we asked him what that experience was like, if he could put it into words. And he said it was what he imagined hell must be like, just walking through an area that all he could see was fire spinning around him. And he just prayed that he would stay alive. We ask a lot of the people who are responding to emergencies. We ask them to endure conditions that many of us would never do ourselves. And so even if we put our best foot forward, there are still things that didn't happen as we would like. And that doesn't mean that everyone who put forward their best effort didn't give it their all.
I've talked to firefighters as well, of course, who did the best that they could with what they had in what was an unprecedented event. What do you say to homeowners who feel like firefighters weren't there for them?
I first want to meet them where they are in their frustration, their anger, and their pain, and say all of that is valid and real, and I am so sorry for the loss that you have experienced. That's why we need to do an after action to understand if it was true failure, if it was, the set of circumstances they were up against, and nothing could have taken on the fires better than what we put forward. That's why we do after action after all of our fires. And so we will get to the bottom of what could have been done better. The Palisades area was really led by the city fire department, and so I am personally less familiar with what sort of operation and preparation they brought into the firefight in the Palisades specifically. I know in our side, on the county side, through the sheriff's department and through county fire, I know all of the preparation and training that I shared with you and the experience that they brought in terms of the partnership. And I think we were able to, protect Topanga. I think, there's certainly concern in the Sunset Mesa area, which is our unincorporated area as well, that's just adjacent to the Palisades area. So staging what could have been done differently, I think is all needs to be part of the conversation because people are asking valid and real questions that deserve answers.
Was there too much vegetation in the Palisades?
Well, I think there's always more work that could be done, and how we are dealing with the fuel that is in the area is an important part of what we need to be doing in terms of preparation and ongoing management. I know that there was a lot of expressed frustration with some of the organizations that are tasked by the state for the state parkland areas to be clearing out that vegetation. And so, looking at how that management system is going or not and what more or different they should be doing, I know is definitely part of the conversation with our state legislators because they really direct how that effort is led in the state areas. For the county part, we are also looking at, we have used goats in Topanga. We've used goats. And I know people have talked about that as sort of this ingenious intervention. And we've used it in the cases where it makes sense. That doesn't work everywhere. We have to use different tactics for different areas. And the good news is, I think, in my experience working with county fire, all options and all tools are on the table. I think now in this moment, we're hearing a lot of discussion from our state partners about Zone Zero and some of the tactics that are being proposed through legislation that are, much more extreme. And I think people are now concerned about that. Are they, going to clear out all of their rose bushes and be surrounded by cement walls and, through very draconian measures?
Real quick, can you just remind us what is Zone Zero?
So Zone Zero is a new policy and practice that was brought forward through state legislation to address how we are looking at all of the conditions that can contribute to a fire emergency. And so it helps make sure that our firefighters are responding only because they have to, because our homeowners and people who live in the community have already adopted practices that keep them safer from fire risk. So things like brush clearance reduction, keeping certain vegetation a safe distance from homes, that sprinkler systems and having cisterns and other interventions directly on one's property. There's all kinds of interventions that go into the execution of Zone Zero and how clearly you regulate an area in terms of vegetation and what can be close to homes. So you want to make sure that, and there are very strict interpretations of what it can mean, clearing out a lot of the vegetation and brush and greenery that is around one's home and, what do they become responsible for? What are we responsible for? And how do we work together to make sure we're actually implementing on the ground what those safety protocols are? So all of that, there's a state conversation happening right now with what implementation. A state law was passed a while back, and now the conversation about implementation is happening. They are giving the directives on this. The state is developing what their directives are in terms of implementation, and then local jurisdictions will be the enforcement body. And I think, at least from an LA County perspective, and speaking with the fire department, which will be the enforcer of the state regulation that comes down, we want to work with community members to make sure that you're still able to enjoy the beautiful parts of living in the hillsides that you enjoy, while also making sure they are safe conditions in which you're living that aren't contributing to a potential disaster. And that's really why we wanted to make sure that this Blue Ribbon Commission was convened to talk about, what should the best practices be? What is realistic? And how do we do this? In some cases, we can do a graduated approach and bring people into, the new normal. In some cases, we have to do it abruptly because it's just a safety concern. And so I think when we work with the fire department, with all of our partners on what fuel management looks like, what all of our preparation looks like, we are actively engaged in what that planning is. So we're having that conversation as a region.
Wow. Well, I'm excited to talk about some of the solutions around all of this and the report. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back in just a couple minutes with Supervisor Lindsey Horvath.
Rebuilding LA is brought to you in part thanks to our presenting advertising sponsor, Rebuild SoCal Partnership, and to our supporting advertising sponsor, Southern California Edison.
You got recycled metal, you got recycled concrete, you got ash and debris, you've got trees. When they say go, it is all hands on deck for the entire company.
Alan Guy, CEO of Anvil Builders, has years of experience cleaning up after disasters. His crews have been working for months in Altadena, helping to repair communities and prepare the ground for families to return.
There's probably 1,000 trucks on the road every day. So how many loads can the landfill take? Who wants the concrete to make base rock and materials in the local area? Who wants the metal in the local area? What do we do with the burnt down trees? Our company takes a huge amount of pride in doing this work. And I think the healing process starts with seeing, your entire life sent out in dump trucks.
Guy met recently with Rebuild SoCal Partnership to talk about the challenges of the job and the personal stories of the families he met. To hear the full story, stay tuned for the end of the episode.
During one of the most severe windstorms Southern California experienced in more than a decade, the Palisades and Eaton Fires ignited, leaving heartbreaking losses in our communities. Now, as we build back, we're building stronger, cleaner, and more resilient. In communities most vulnerable to dangerous weather conditions and wildfires, Southern California Edison is placing power lines underground, hardening the electric system by installing wires with protective coating, and adding advanced technology to help keep communities safe. So when Southern California faces the next storm, the next most severe event,
Copy helicopters, structures adjacent here to Paiva Road.
We'll be ready. Learn more at sce.com/disaster recovery.
When a wildfire takes so much, it's hard to know where to start. But in neighborhoods across Los Angeles, something powerful is taking shape. People are rebuilding, not just homes, but strength, stability, and a deeper sense of community. Based in Southern California, Axos Bank believes in that kind of resilience and proudly stands with regional communities. Axos's construction mortgage program is here to support those ready to rebuild, on their terms, on their timeline. Because starting over isn't easy, but with the right support, it can lead to something even stronger. With one-time closed loans, interest-only payments during construction, and financing for everything from full rebuilds to major renovations, Axos offers fast, flexible options built to match the home and future you're envisioning. A safer home, a stronger community, a future rebuilt together. If you're ready to take that first step, visit Axos Bank at axosbank.com/rebuild. That's axosbank.com/rebuild. Loan approval is subject to credit approval and program guidelines. Not all loan programs are available in all states for all loan amounts. Interest rate and program terms are subject to change without notice. Mortgage, home equity, and credit products are offered through Axos Bank. Deposit products are offered through Axos Bank. Axos Bank is an equal housing lender. Member FDIC. Axos Bank, NMLS number 524995.
We are back. This is Rebuilding LA with Supervisor Lindsey Horvath. Thanks again for your time today. There's a lot to dig into.
Yes.
So let's talk about this Blue Ribbon Commission. You talked at the start of this conversation about how many fires have happened just since you've become supervisor, and of course the Woolsey fire. Talk to me about why you decided to do this big commission report, why you thought it was important.
Well, we knew that all of the expertise in terms of what rebuild was going to look like wasn't going to come just from inside the county bureaucracy. And in fact, we heard from those who had lived through the Woolsey experience that, what the county had brought forward for the areas that we were responsible for in leading recovery just wasn't delivering to everyone's satisfaction. So if you just do what you've always done, then you're going to get what you always got. And so I think in this case, we needed to call together the experts in arenas that were not just about, green building, although the Green Building Council was at the table, but also about insurance for future insurability, making sure that insurance is going to come back into this market because future insurability is affordability. We wanted to bring the finance sector into this conversation to see how they can help us potentially upfront some of the capital that we're going to need to make some of those system improvements, not only for individual homeowners who want to adopt best practices in terms of home and fire hardening, but also, regionally on infrastructure changes. And there's been a lot of talk about undergrounding utility equipment in terms of our power utilities, and that's critically important. We know that having the wires undergrounded is important, and I know that our utilities are in all of our areas are looking at doing that or actively doing it right now. But we also need to be thinking about water infrastructure. When I was chair of the board, when our first motion that we brought forward that very first day was to adopt the countywide water plan and looking at our water systems. So, in my district, Waterworks 29 is one of the most fragile water systems serving Malibu and the Topanga area. It's been on everyone's radar for a number of years and needing, critical help and support. So how do we invest in that infrastructure system now? We also know that telecommunications is an important component, and when people were without internet access or unable to communicate and get some of those alerts, I vividly remember the mayor of Malibu calling me saying, they got an evacuation notice at 2 or 3 in the morning. All of their lights were out, all of the communications were down. He's like, how am I supposed to evacuate a community that I can't even communicate with? So, how do we look at home hardening, but also creating systems where we're doing solar and energy storage, so there's resiliency and we have those backups locally.
Okay, that's a very comprehensive list, but I really want to drill down on some of the specifics. Like, let's talk about the water supply.
Okay.
We did a whole episode on Malibu. They're talking about building water tanks potentially. Matt Hamilton told us about how in San Francisco they actually have an emergency system in place that can pump ocean water if they have a raging inferno. How did the commission suggest we tackle the water issue?
Well, there were a lot of suggestions. And in fact, in our region, in the 3rd District, we have several different water agencies. I mentioned Waterworks 29, which the county leads. But there's also the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District that has been doing extraordinary innovation in terms of providing clean drinking water for the region and thinking about water resiliency going forward and how we source water locally, not only for clean drinking water, but also to fight fires and address emergency circumstances. So we have a lot of great expertise right in our region, and that's why we tried to put it at the table. But we also need to invest in the infrastructure that can help us deliver water in these new ways. And so there's some work that has already been done through the leadership of the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District and their clean water project that they have been leading. But there's also a significant investment that needs to be made into some of these fragile water systems, because in the county, we heard of stories in other places where there wasn't water coming out of fire hydrants. In our case, there was water, but in some case, because it was tapped in so many places, the pressure was too low to be as effective as it needed to be to fight the fires. So how do we make sure that the infrastructure is there to keep the pressure up, to respond to whatever is on the ground? And so you need different kinds of infrastructure, and this is the moment to invest in it. And we had people who were directly impacted by both the Eaton and Palisades fire on this commission, so their lived experience informed what conversation we were having about what the future needed to look like. And we just knew that we were going to need outside help. And in partnership with, UCLA, the crown jewel of my district, I think bringing their expertise with all of these industry experts together to talk about what we needed to be thinking about and what we certainly weren't thinking about in those first few moments while we were still addressing the fire itself. And we really, I know one of the recommendations that has come out of that is to think about the recovery process and the rebuild process, sort of how we led the debris removal process. We worked in the county led the effort.
Because you're describing like this very comprehensive approach. Item number one that they recommended was this rebuilding authority.
Yes.
Explain that and why it's important.
Sure. So as I mentioned, if we just do what we've always done, then, we know that status quo wasn't keeping people happy, even with, in the best of times. And so before all of the fires. And so we know that we're going to need outside help, sort of as we did with the debris removal process. The county led the whole region for Malibu, for Los Angeles, Pasadena, the unincorporated areas, in partnership with our federal government on the debris removal process. And I know you'll recall, when we first started having those difficult conversations, we heard phase one of that process was going to take maybe 6 months. Phase two might be another 18 months. So 2 years from now, you might have a shot at looking at how to rebuild and get back into your community.
Right.
And we just heard how unacceptable that was to everyone. And obviously it was to us too. And so we found a different way in working with our state and federal partners to leverage scale, to have the county leadership working across jurisdictions. And so we cut down what was originally projected to be a 2-year process down to, about 6 months. So moved much quicker. And that helps give people hope that we're committed to getting people back into their space, and that if they ask government to be their partners in this effort, it's not going to take forever. We heard from, that was one of the pieces of information we heard from the Woolsey after action was, just how long it took for people to rebuild if they've rebuilt at all. And so we took that to heart. And so we want to take that same spirit to this rebuild authority, leveraging scale, working across communities to not only make sure that we're moving with speed, but most importantly, that we're also, we're centering the experience of community members and doing everything that we can to make this easier for them.
So is a rebuilding authority, is this like a new government agency? Who's part of the authority? So
the way we've proposed it at the county in terms of the conversations that we've been having is a joint powers authority. We want to create a table where everyone who wants to be part of the conversation can join us in it. I know that there have been different places where this conversation has been happening, and so different approaches contemplate different things. If a state wants to create an agency that does certain things, that's one approach. Our approach from the county is we know what worked in terms of the debris removal process, working collaboratively at scale and bringing everyone together really helped. So that's what we want to do. We want to set a table to bring everyone together. So if you need help rebuilding, if you need help navigating this process, we can leverage scale to not only help you rebuild, but also for the region, drive down materials costs and hopefully buy at bulk and scale. We can hopefully also protect communities from the thing that I think is most imminently creating fear for people, which is speculators coming in from the outside and buying up properties and trying to change your community into something that's totally unrecognizable. And so if we have an authority that can, work with property owners who might not want to rebuild for whatever reason, but to make sure that property is secured and stays within control of community members and not outside speculators, we'll be able to be partners in that. And so I think it's the concept was put into place for other disasters throughout the country after Hurricane Katrina, after 9/11. This concept isn't new, that when you have a disaster of such magnitude, you have to, call in outside forces to come together and be solely focused on getting this done. And if we want people to get back to their communities in any sort of reasonable amount of time. We need people full-time dedicated to it. And right now, we don't have that inside our current governmental system. So we need to make sure that there's a dedicated place that people can go to and make sure that people 24/7 are focused on their recovery.
So my understanding is that State Senator Ben Allen tried to take this idea and run with it, get it into this legislative session, but then there's been some backlash to the idea. Some maybe based on misinformation, but also this legitimate concern of losing local control. So can you tell us, where does this conversation stand now?
Yeah, so he brought forward legislation, and, by the time it got to him, the state legislature only has so many mechanisms to be able to introduce a new idea. So he used this process that's called gut and amend. We at local government don't particularly love it because new ideas come very quickly through that process. It feels like, it hasn't kind of gone through the months of discussion that other bills do when they're first introduced. And normally through a gut and amend process, it does what it says. You gut whatever the bill was before, and you amend it with new language to address whatever it is you're trying to solve. In this case, Senator Allen kept some language from the bill that he had originally, and then brought in the language that had to do with the rebuild authority. And I think that's been a significant cause for confusion in many ways, because the original language had to do with something around transit-oriented development and density,
right.
And that's nothing about what a rebuild authority is about. It was, all of the other language that my office worked with him on to sort of establish what this rebuild authority would do. And, that was the vehicle we were using. It was important to him to keep that language in. We had expressed, that might be a little confusing. It's not, what a rebuild authority is for, but it was important to him. And so we are where we are on that. But I do know that his bill, I think because of the confusion that was caused, is now a 2-year bill to sort of slow down a little bit the process to help people understand what it is and what it's not, why that language is important to him, and what the rebuild authority would actually do, and making sure that most importantly, whatever comes of it, if anything, is aligned with what the community needs and what the actual needs are on the ground locally. So right now it's a 2-year bill. Whether it survives or not is yet to be determined. But I think certainly the concept needs more conversation. The idea came forward not only through the Blue Ribbon Commission, but there was also a report from the Urban Land Institute. ULI issued a report in March prior to the Blue Ribbon Commission that also said there needs to be sort of this outside authority. So there were several places where the notion of an authority came from. And so it's really about how do we create a structure that acknowledges that we need to have a dedicated space for people to be focused on this issue and focused on this effort, but also making sure that it doesn't do the things that people are afraid of, scooping up and stealing away land use authority, creating 7-story buildings where there once were single-family homes. I think there's a lot of concern and confusion, and making sure that people really understand what our intentions are and are not is important. And I think that's all got to be part of this process.
Well, and there's backlash in the Palisades right now, not just around, the idea of apartment buildings, but even duplexes and the impacts of past legislation like SB 9. Where do you stand on this issue around density in that community? And is that something that the commission report recognized?
I think, we've heard concerns in all directions. We've heard from people, if you ask me to build something, anything more than what was there before the fire, I financially won't be able to afford it, so you're going to price me out of my neighborhood. And we certainly don't want that, and we don't want that to be the only option that people have. That's why we wanted to bring other tools to the table to help make sure that from a home hardening, fire hardening, best 21st century best practices, that people aren't left on their own in terms of rebuilding what was there. But we also know that some people have said, the only way I'm going to be able to afford this is if I can turn my single-family home into a duplex so I can rent out one side of it and have a source of income. So I think there are different interests even within communities. And every community will be governed by their local land use authority. So in the city of Los Angeles, for the Palisades area, that will be the city of Los Angeles. And in the Altadena area, that will be, which is unincorporated Los Angeles County, that will be the Los Angeles County land use directives that, Supervisor Barger works on with her constituents. I'm in charge of the Sunset Mesa and Topanga area from the unincorporated area county area perspective. But the city of Malibu has already said, can the county come in and help us? We're going to need your partnership on a whole host of things because we can't do this all by ourselves. And of course, we're going to show up and help. That's how we got the debris removal process going. We want to be collaborative and helpful partners in all of the spaces where we need to be, and get ourselves out of the way in the areas where we are not helpful. And I think both are happening as a result, not only of this Blue Ribbon Commission and this notion of a rebuild authority, but just in the conversations that were happening with community, region-wide.
Did the whole debacle around Senator Allen's bill and the rebuilding authority, did it raise red flags for you about maybe there being some distance between this commission you put together with experts in their report and then actually needing to get buy-in from the community for these changes?
I think that's really the biggest struggle we have as leaders, right? We have to make sure that we are centering the voices of our communities in this effort and doing what they need us to do. I think sometimes government comes in with all kinds of ideas we think are bright ideas that really aren't meeting the moment for what people are experiencing on the ground. But then there are times where we have to move quickly, because if we just let everything go to, a collective process, nothing will get done, and it will take years upon years upon years. So how we approach that, I think, depends on the issue. And in this case, there are communities who need that help now. So figuring out how we start creating a rebuild authority structure is still moving forward. The state legislation was not the only vehicle. The city of Los Angeles has expressed very clearly they are reticent about the idea entirely, so we respect that. But there are communities in unincorporated LA County who need us to be 100% focused 24/7. They need one place to go. They've never had to build a home before. For many people, they're still emotionally stuck in the fact that they lost their home. They lost their community, their places of worship, their schools. They can't fathom that this is even happening to them. Some people are still in that place. So we really have to have a place that meets people wherever they are in their journey, and make sure that we're showing up for them in the right way. The council members and mayor in the city of Malibu and the city staff in Malibu have said to the county, we want your help. We still want to retain our land use authority. We still want to be, driving the vision for what our community looks like. Great. We just need your help because we're too small a city to do all of these things, especially the infrastructure on our own. Of course. So we'll show up as a county to meet you where you are in terms of the needs that you have and engage you in those conversations. But we have to have a dedicated place to do it. We can't just leave it up to Public Works and regional planning and, their typical processes in order to address this. It's not going to work.
All these proposals sound great, but how likely is it that any of this will actually get done? How close are you to getting any of it done?
We're actively working on it right now. I mean, some of this is, policy that can change in a short period of time. Some of it takes longer time. And the truth is, people are being issued building permits right now. We started a self-certification process to try and get county bureaucracy out of the way for those who will rely on the county for their rebuild efforts. I believe the city of Los Angeles has done a similar approach. And so we're trying to cut through that proverbial red tape in order for those who have the resources to move forward. Nobody's being held back at this moment by these proposals. But what we're trying to use them to do is, at this moment, we're thinking systems-wide. How do we move forward on, strengthening our water resiliency and undergrounding our utility equipment in the unincorporated county? We were working on undergrounding utility equipment in the Topanga Canyon area before the fires ever broke out. Edison is undergrounding utility equipment also along the PCH and in our Malibu communities. So that's important, as we're moving forward. So there are things that are happening right now, and the thing that people can be doing is showing up and supporting these communities, making sure that you're supporting local businesses, working with the chambers to know where you can find your favorite business if it's been temporarily relocated. We've been working with our Department of Economic Opportunity to get grants out to both individual homeowners, to small business owners, and to workers themselves directly to try and help get them through this time of crisis. Some of that has been funded through philanthropy. Some of it has been funded directly with county dollars. So there's work that's already been done and is ongoing. And then there's, the bigger conversations require the kind of community input that we've talked about. So it's not going to happen overnight. But we do know that we're taking the experiences of those who are already applying for their rebuild permits and what they're asking of us and using that to inform our process too. As we're making these decisions, we're not chiseling anything in stone from the outset. It has to be an ongoing conversation. There are things we've learned from past experience, but there will be things we learn through this process. And so the more that we engage with our public and have a dedicated place for them to go, the better.
Just how I want to end is with climate change. We are using the word unprecedented a lot. We've seen more disasters across the country. I mean, the flooding in Texas, on top of the fires that we had here, the hurricane season has gotten worse. What has this crisis taught you about leadership in these moments?
I think a lot of it is listening. People have a lot on their hearts. They've just lived through the unthinkable. That different family members in the same household will be in different places. There will be family members who are eager to rebuild and get back home. There will be family members who are so traumatized by the horrible disaster that they just lived through that they can't imagine going back to the same neighborhood, and everything in between. And so my first responsibility is to show up and, like I said, try to meet people where they are in their experience of these fires and just really listen to them, because I think that sets the table for how we start to rebuild trust. If we just start talking about a bunch of things that they don't want to hear, then we're sort of talking past each other and we're not really making a connection. So the most important part right now is listening, and then making sure that we're creating the systems that will need to deliver the results that people are expecting. But in this 21st century reality, I think we're all acknowledging that we can't just do what we've always done, and that we need to think differently about how not only we rebuild physically, but how we help people recover and then prepare. Because these are our new normal. These storms, these disasters are our new normal. And so both making sure that people are prepared for the experience of them in terms of tactical operations, but also how are we building in mental health and trauma response and helping people heal their hearts as much as they're healing their homes and their communities. And so there's a lot of work to be done. I know there's a lot of anger and frustration, and that's got to be part of the conversation because everyone's experiencing it. As long as we can take all of that and move to a productive place and put it into actionable steps that help people move forward, I don't care how people show up. I think what they want to see is results. And that is my job in this moment, is to listen and deliver results.
All right, Supervisor Lindsey Horvath, thank you so much for your time and your candor today.
Absolutely.
And that's it for us today. We should note that since we interviewed Supervisor Horvath, there have been some new developments regarding building back in the Pacific Palisades. California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass took executive action to limit the implementation of SB 9, the bill designed to boost the housing stock across the state by allowing multiple units on lots zoned for single-family homes. Residents had pushed back, arguing that more housing and therefore more people is not what this area needs, given the challenges in evacuating everyone during the fire. We have more information on this and everything else we discussed in our show notes, including a link to the Blue Ribbon Commission report. You can find that anywhere you get your podcasts. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube as well. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Next week, we will have LA Times reporter Rebecca Ellis to talk about her investigation into why so few fire trucks were present the morning the Eaton Fire swept into West Altadena. Don't miss that conversation. Please join us for that. Thank you so much for listening to Rebuilding LA. Here's a word from our sponsors.
The following is a paid message from Rebuild SoCal Partnership. Sponsor has no editorial oversight.
Anvil Builders has been working for months in Altadena, clearing the remains of homes that burned down during the devastating fire. Anvil CEO Alan Guy helped clean the Paradise Fire of 2018 and many others. Guy recently met John Switalski, the executive director of Rebuild SoCal Partnership in Altadena. They talked about the challenges Anvil faces and the people whose homes they are helping to rebuild.
Today, we're going to be loading ash and debris, both excavators, Abel, Chris. We're doing that. Going to be watering. Got to be ready with the trucks when they're going in and out. Got to make sure traffic control is doing their thing.
What does it take to get prepared and to clean up these hazardous sites with efficiency?
It takes a lot. A lot of it was our staffing. It's all about our people, right? It's all the people that manage it, the local workforce. We always take on the most challenging job. We always say our people thrive in those environments.
And then on a site specific, like we're seeing here, what goes into planning to actually do that work once you hit the ground?
You know, we got to figure out where everything's going. You got recycled metal, you got recycled concrete, you got ash and debris, you've got trees. When they say go, it is all hands on deck for the entire company to get people, resources, everything ready to go to start the cleanup process, to rebuild these communities. There's probably 1,000 trucks on the road every day. So how many loads can the landfill take? Who wants the concrete to make base rock and materials in the local area? Who wants the metal in the local area? What do we do with the burnt down trees?
Fire has scarred the landscape, but also scarred the communities. What does it mean to you and to your company to take part in the recovery?
Our company takes a huge amount of pride in doing this work. And I think the healing process starts with seeing, you know, your entire life sent out in dump trucks. It's very emotional, as you can imagine. We found pictures, wedding rings, family heirlooms, like you name it.
You and your employees are making connections throughout the community by doing that. How does that permeate through the culture of your company?
Super cool to see the appreciation from people that have lost everything. You know, they'll bring them donuts. They're the ones that lost everything, and they're bringing our guys and girls donuts, which is really cool to see.
Anvil foreman Philip Thompson is with his crew every day, and he has met families who have lost everything.
Everybody has to have a release, and that's what we try to do for the homeowners. Give them a release where they can talk about what's going on. We've actually prayed with people to help them through the process. We've cried with them. Again, very emotional, sorry. But that's how touching this is for all of us.
What is required of your company to make sure that the hazardous materials don't impact your folks?
The workers have to have a 40-hour HAZWOPER training. It's put on by either a union or they can do it themselves or we offer it. It was like 2.5 million tons of debris coming off these sites, hundreds of thousands of truckloads. So there's hazardous stuff in the soil that needs to be hauled to the dump.
Anvil Superintendent Manny Santos is responsible for the overall operation of each work site.
We try to get the metal out first, the concrete, and then ash debris last. Once we get all that done, we do our final scrape, which would be a 6-inch on any raised foundations or soil areas that fall within the ash footprint. So these guys right now, you'll see behind me, they're lining the trucks with plastic. The hot zone is where the material is getting moved and getting loaded. Anytime we remove that material and move it and disturb it, we have to be in full PPE. We are working 7 days a week, and the reason why is because this job needs to be completed in a timely fashion, and we're sacrificing that for these homeowners because we want them to be back here and we want them to be able to rebuild as fast as possible.
Can you tell us a little bit about your company?
We're signatory to the operators, laborers, and carpenters, and they're spectacular partners in this because they have qualified people that are ready to go to work. Our whole focus in our organization is making sure the field is successful. They're the ones that do the work.
We like to think of infrastructure is all around us. It's everything we touch and feel. It's schools, hospitals, in addition to roads and bridges. What are your thoughts on the challenges of infrastructure throughout California?
I think California and the country as a whole, we're behind in developing and maintaining our infrastructure. There's a lot of new infrastructure needed. There's a lot of old infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. It's great for the economy, it creates jobs.
It seems that the Army Corps has done a pretty good job in getting companies like you and others to get this work done quickly.
The Eaton Fire and the Palisades Fire has been the quickest and most efficient cleanup in California since we've started doing this work, I think. It took all the state agencies to make this happen. I mean, it's probably the most expensive disaster in the US. I mean, it's a huge task, 5 months from start to finish. It was monumental what they all did together.
Alan, thanks for joining us here in Altadena. This is a really remarkable effort in all the logistics that went into this, and to get this 95% done in just about 5 months.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Rebuilding LA is hosted by and reported on by me, Kate Cagle. Our senior producer and showrunner is Megan Larson. Our associate producers are Jordan Patterson and Megan Botel. Our video director is Julia McCabe. Our director of post-production is Patrick Stewart. And our senior sound recording engineer is Nick Norton, with audio engineering help from David Iskandarian and motion graphics by Dougal Henkin. Our video editors are Peter Grayson and Daniel Flesher. Ben Church is our senior coordinating producer, and Anne-Marie Hauser is our production manager. Our podcast marketing manager is Bryn Jura, and our product marketing director is Becca Dorman. Our general counsel at the LA Times is Jeff Glasser. Special thanks to President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times, Chris Argenteri, and the executive editor of the Los Angeles Times, Terry Tang. Rebuilding LA is co-created by LA Times Studios president Anna Migzanian and executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson. And one final thank you to all the residents of Altadena and the Pacific Palisades for sharing your stories with us.